I remember the exact moment my sister decided the night belonged to her. It was supposed to be simple. An anniversary dinner, nothing fancy. Just a long table in our dining room, decent food, a few bottles of wine, and the usual mix of family and friends who knew us well enough to stop pretending. I'd spent the afternoon cooking because that's what I do when I want things to feel normal. Steaks rested on the counter. The kitchen smelled like garlic and butter. Everything was controlled, measured, familiar. That's how I like it. Mark came home early, which should have been a good sign. He kissed my cheek, glanced at the table and said, "Looks great. Not warm, not cold, just neutral." I noticed it the same way I notice everything now, but I didn't say anything. 6 years of marriage teaches you which details matter and which ones you file away for later. Vanessa arrived 20 minutes late, loud as usual, already laughing before the door was fully open. She had that energy she always brings, like the room is better just because she walked into it. She hugged me too tight, kissed my cheek a little too close to my ear and said, "Wow, you really went all out." The tone made it sound like a compliment and a challenge at the same time. She scanned the room the way some people check mirrors, making sure she was being seen. Dinner started smoothly enough. Small talk, someone commented on my job, asked if I was traveling again soon. I gave the short answer. I always do. People like the idea of the military more than the details, and I've learned not to give them what they don't actually want. Vanessa poured herself more wine than anyone else and launched into a story about work, about how exhausting it is to manage people who just don't have the instinct. She said instinct like it was something you're born with, not something you build. She looked at Mark when she said it. He smiled. I noticed that too. By the time the plates were cleared, the room had loosened up. That's when people start saying things they think will land as jokes. Someone asked how Mark and I managed to keep things exciting with my schedule. It wasn't a loaded question, just the kind people ask when they're half a glass past polite. Vanessa didn't wait for either of us to answer. "Oh, that's easy," she said, laughing before she even finished the sentence. "They don't." A few people chuckled, unsure. I felt my fork pause halfway to the plate. Mark shifted in his chair. Vanessa leaned back like she'd just been handed a microphone. She continued waving her hand. When your sister spends half her life on base or out of town, you can't exactly expect fireworks at home. She tilted her head at me, smiling. No offense. That's the thing about Vanessa. She always says no offense right after saying exactly what she means. Someone cleared their throat. Someone else laughed too loud. I stayed still. Not frozen, still. There's a difference. When you've spent years being evaluated, you learn how to keep your face neutral even when your body is doing inventory. Vanessa took another sip of wine and leaned forward. And let's be honest, she said, lowering her voice just enough to sound like she was sharing a secret. Mark deserves some credit. 6 years is a long time to survive. On discipline alone. She laughed again. I love you, Brooke, but you're not exactly known for being fun. I looked at Mark. Not dramatically, just enough to see if he'd step in. He didn't. Vanessa saw it. Of course she did. She always watches for the opening. I'm kidding, she said, smiling wider now. Mostly, I just mean, not everyone is cut out to be amazing in bed. Some people are great at schedules and checklists. Others bring the spark. The word hung there longer than it should have. A few people laughed because silence makes them nervous. Someone took a drink. I felt my jaw tighten, then relax. I set my fork down carefully. No shaking, no sudden movements. Control first, reaction later. Vanessa laughed again, louder this time. Come on, you all know what I'm talking about. Brooke's idea of intimacy is probably setting a timer and calling it efficient. She grinned at me. Terrible in bed might be harsh but accurate. That did it. Not because it was cruel, because it was deliberate. You don't say something like that by accident. You don't say it in front of your husband, your family, your friends, unless you want something to happen. I waited. That's my instinct. Wait. Assess. See who moves. No one did. Mark stared at his glass. Someone looked at the table. Another person checked their phone like it suddenly mattered. Vanessa watched me the entire time, her smile fixed, her eyes sharp. And for just a second, when she glanced at Mark, I saw something else pass between them. Not affection, not humor, recognition. I felt it then. Not anger, not embarrassment, a shift. This wasn't a joke that went too far. This was a line crossed on purpose. I picked up my soda and took a slow sip. Cold, flat, It tasted like nothing. Vanessa kept talking, filling the space, writing the moment she'd created. I let her. I let everyone else get comfortable with what they were hearing. People always reveal more when they think you're not going to stop them. The room settled into a strange quiet, where conversation kept going, but the tone had changed. Something had been said that couldn't be unsaid. Everyone felt it, even if they didn't know what to do with it. I stayed where I was, back straight, hands relaxed on the table. Years in uniform teach you how to sit through discomfort without flinching. They also teach you how to remember details that matter later. Vanessa laughed one more time, softer now, like she'd finished her point. She leaned back, satisfied, already moving on to the next story. I looked at Mark again. This time he met my eyes for half a second, then looked away. That was enough. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. I stayed seated, listened to the scrape of chairs, the clink of glasses, the way the room tried to recover its balance. I noticed who avoided looking at me and who pretended nothing had happened. I noticed how easily Vanessa slipped back into charm, like nothing had just been exposed. And I noticed how quiet everything felt once I stopped trying to hold it together for everyone else. I pushed my chair back just enough to stand, without making a sound, and carried empty plates into the kitchen, giving everyone something else to look at. That's the trick people don't notice. If you keep moving, they assume you're fine. Vanessa kept talking from the table, her voice floating in behind me, telling some story that didn't matter. I rinsed a plate, stacked it in the sink, and listened the way I've been trained to listen. Not for words, for tone, for rhythm, for what didn't belong. Mark followed me into the kitchen a minute later. He didn't touch me. He didn't apologize. He leaned against the counter like he was waiting for instructions. "You okay?" he asked. The question landed wrong, not because it was cruel, because it was empty. "I'm fine," I said, because it was the fastest way to end the conversation. I dried my hands, folded the towel, and set it aside. No rush, no edge. The more normal you sound, the less people ask. He nodded like that solved something and went back to the table. I stood there for a moment, staring at the sink, letting the noise behind me fade into background static. Years in uniform teach you that silence isn't passive. Silence is information. It tells you who thinks they've won and who's waiting for permission to keep going. Vanessa thought she'd won. When I walked back into the dining room, the energy had shifted. People were careful now. Compliments about the food, jokes that didn't go anywhere. Vanessa somehow had turned into the gracious sister again, offering to help clear plates, touching my arm like nothing had happened. Her hand lingered just a second too long. "You know I'm kidding, right?" she said quietly, smiling for anyone who might be watching. "I know," I said. And I did. That was the problem. The night wound down the way these things always do. Coats grabbed, hugs exchanged. Someone promised brunch. Vanessa hugged me again, tighter this time, whispering, "Love you," like that was supposed to clean up the mess she'd made. Mark walked people to the door. I stayed in the dining room, collecting glasses, stacking plates. When the house finally went quiet, I turned off the lights one by one and stood in the hallway, listening to the silence settle. Mark cleared his throat behind me. "She didn't mean it like that," he said. I turned slowly. How did she mean it? He opened his mouth, then closed it. "You know how she is." I did. That was another thing I'd learned the hard way. "I'm going to take a shower," I said. Not as an escape, as a decision. The water was hot. I stood there longer than usual, not thinking about what she said, but about how easily she said it, about how comfortable she was saying it in front of him, about how he'd let it happen. When you stop reacting, patterns get louder. Later, lying in bed, Mark fell asleep quickly. He always does. I stared at the ceiling, counting breaths the way I do when my mind won't shut up. Somewhere between the 10th and the 20th, I realized something else that didn't sit right. Vanessa hadn't been nervous. People who cross a line by accident check your face. They backtrack. They apologize too much. Vanessa didn't do any of that. She escalated. She sharpened the joke. She watched the room adjust around her. That's not a slip. That's practice. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm and went for a run. Cold air, empty streets. My body did what it always does when my head needs space. One foot in front of the other, steady pace, no music, just breathing and the sound of my shoes hitting pavement. By the time I got back, Mark was already dressed, scrolling on his phone at the kitchen table. He looked up when I walked in, smiling like the night before had been erased by sleep. "Morning," he said. "Morning." He watched me pour coffee. You were quiet last night. I was tired. He nodded, satisfied. Vanessa texted me, he said casually. She feels bad. I looked at him over the rim of my mug. What did she say? He hesitated. Just that she didn't mean to embarrass you? Did she say what part she felt bad about? He shrugged. She said, she jokes. There it was again, the excuse that turns intention into personality. I didn't respond. I grabbed my bag and keys, already mentally shifting to work mode. Schedules, briefings, things that make sense. At the base, the day moved the way it always does. Meetings, emails, someone complaining about logistics like it was personal. I handled it all without missing a beat. From the outside, nothing had changed. Inside, something had clicked into place. At lunch, I sat alone eating, quickly scanning messages on my phone. A notification popped up from a group chat Vanessa had started months ago, family updates, holiday planning. She'd posted a photo from the night before, everyone smiling, captioned it "perfect night with my favorite people." I stared at the picture longer than I should have. My smile in the photo looked real. That bothered me more than anything she'd said. When I got home that evening, Mark was already there. He offered to cook. I let him. I watched the way he moved around the kitchen, comfortable, familiar. The way he talked about his day, careful not to bring up the night before. So he said, plating the food, Vanessa wants to do dinner again soon. Just us this time. I set my fork down. Why? He shrugged. To smooth things over. With me, I asked. With everyone, he said, then corrected himself. With you, I nodded. I'll think about it. That answer made him uneasy. I could see it. People like certainty, even bad certainty. Silence makes them imagine things they can't control. After dinner, I sat on the couch scrolling through emails, half listening, as Mark talked about a project at work. He mentioned a coworker by name complained about deadlines. Nothing unusual, except I noticed how often her name came up. How casually, like it was already familiar to me. I filed it away. That night when Mark went to bed early, I stayed up, laptop open, not searching for anything in particular. Just looking, Vanessa's social media, old photos, comments, the way she talked about family, about loyalty, about honesty, big words thrown around lightly. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. A message from Vanessa. Hey, just wanted to make sure we're good. I stared at it for a long moment before typing back. Of course. I set the phone face down and leaned back against the couch. Arms crossed, breathing slow. The house was quiet. Mark was asleep. Vanessa thought everything was fine. And for the first time since the dinner, I understood exactly why staying quiet had made her so comfortable. I left the phone where it was and went to the bedroom without answering again. Sleep didn't come easily, not because I was replaying the words, but because my head kept lining things up in rows, the way it does when something doesn't add up. Patterns don't announce themselves. They show up quietly, one familiar detail at a time, until ignoring them feels irresponsible. Vanessa and I have always been different. That's the polite version people use. The honest version is that she's always needed the room, and I've always been fine without it. Growing up, she talked and I listened. She told stories and I did my homework. Teachers loved her confidence. My parents loved that she made things look easy. I learned early that being reliable doesn't get applause. It just gets expected. When I chose the military, she laughed like it was a phase. You'll be back, she said. You're not built for that kind of life. She meant loud. She meant visible. She meant hers. I wasn't trying to prove her wrong. I was trying to find a place where rules mattered more than personality, where showing up on time counted, where nobody cared if you were charming as long as you did your job. Vanessa never understood that. She understood attention. She understood leverage. By morning, the house felt too small. I showered, dressed, and left before Mark woke up. The drive to work was quiet radio, off, windows cracked. I kept thinking about the way she'd said it at the table. Not angry, not careless, confident. Like she was repeating something she'd already rehearsed. At lunch, I called my mother, not to complain, just to hear her voice. We talked about nothing. Weather, a neighbor's dog. She asked how the dinner went. Fine, I said. There was a pause. Vanessa mentioned she might have joked too much. Did she? I said. She didn't mean anything by it. I know. That made my mother relax. I could hear it in her voice. Everyone wants things to stay where they are. No one wants to examine why a joke landed the way it did. When I hung up, I sat there a minute longer than usual, watching people come and go. Families, couples, coworkers, everyone performing whatever version of themselves they thought fit the setting. On the drive home, I took the long way, past the neighborhood we grew up in, past the house where Vanessa learned early that saying things first meant people listened. I remembered birthday parties where she opened gifts loudly and I opened mine carefully, not wanting to take up space. I remembered how she used to speak for me when relatives asked questions. "She's shy," she'd say, smiling like she was doing me a favor. I wasn't shy. I was quiet. There's a difference. At home, Mark was already there, pacing the living room with his phone pressed to his ear. He lowered his voice when he saw me, turned his back, finished the call quickly. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah," he said too fast. "Work stuff." He set the phone down, screen up this time. I noticed the name at the top when it lit up again. Vanessa. He swiped it away without opening it. "You hungry?" he asked. "I ate late," I said. He nodded, relieved. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, the TV on, neither of us really watching. After a few minutes, he tried again. "She's really upset," he said. "About what?" "About how you took it." I looked at him. "How did I take it?" He hesitated. "You didn't laugh. That's not an answer. She thinks you were judging her." I let that sit there. Vanessa humiliates me in front of everyone, and somehow I'm the problem because I didn't make it easier for her. Mark rubbed his face. "She's sensitive. So am I," said. "I just don't perform it." He didn't like that. I could tell. He shifted, crossed his arms like he was bracing for a conversation he didn't want. "Why are you making this bigger than it is?" he asked. "I'm not," I said. "I'm noticing it." That shut him down. People don't argue with noticing. They argue with accusations. I hadn't accused anyone of anything. I was just paying attention. Later, I went through old photos on my phone. Family holidays, group shots. Vanessa always front and center, arm around someone, smile wide. Me slightly off to the side, present but not claiming space. I wasn't bitter about it. I'd chosen that position, or so I thought. It hit me then how often Vanessa framed my life for other people. Brooke's married to her job. Brooke doesn't need much. Brooke's not emotional like the rest of us. None of it outright cruel. All of it limiting. She'd been doing it for years. That night, Mark fell asleep with the TV still on. I muted it and sat there listening to the low hum of the house. I thought about the look Vanessa gave him at the table. Not flirtatious, familiar, like they shared a context I didn't. The next day, Vanessa invited us over for coffee. Just us. To clear the air, she said in the text. Mark showed it to me like proof of goodwill. "Do you want to go?" he asked. I considered it. Not emotionally, strategically, sure, I said. Her house looked exactly the way it always does. Immaculate but warm, like a magazine spread that's been lived in just enough to feel real. She hugged me at the door, then Mark lingering again. "I hate tension," she said, pulling back. "Life's too short." She made coffee, talked fast, filled the space with chatter. About work, about a trip she wanted to take. About how hard it is to keep relationships strong when people are always busy. She glanced at me when she said it. "I worry about you," she added lightly. "I just want you to be happy." "I am," I said. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You don't always look it." Mark shifted in his seat. "Vanessa just means—" "I know what she means," I said. Vanessa laughed. "See? You're always so serious." She leaned back, crossing her legs. "I forget sometimes that you don't hear things the way other people do." "Like what?" "Like jokes," she said without missing a beat. There it was again. Not denial. Reframing. I watched her face as she said it. Calm, confident, comfortable. This wasn't about smoothing things over. This was about establishing ground rules. Her rules. I took a sip of coffee and set the mug down carefully. "I hear jokes just fine," I said. "I just don't laugh at ones meant to land on me." Mark looked between us. Vanessa's smile tightened. "I'd never hurt you on purpose," she said. I believed her. That was the problem. Hurting me wasn't the goal. Positioning herself was. Making sure everyone knew where she stood in relation to me. Making sure I stayed where she was used to seeing me. When we left, Mark exhaled like he'd been holding his breath the entire time. "That went well," he said. I didn't answer. The drive home felt longer than usual. My thoughts weren't racing, they were settling. By the time we pulled into the driveway, I wasn't wondering why Vanessa said what she said anymore. I was wondering how long she'd been saying versions of it when I wasn't in the room. I put my keys on the counter and didn't move them again, like the night needed to stay exactly where it was. Mark went straight to the bedroom, saying he had an early call. I stayed in the kitchen, wiped the counter once, even though it was already clean, and listened to the house settle. The refrigerator hummed, pipes clicked, normal sounds. The kind that tell you nothing dramatic is supposed to happen. His phone buzzed on the counter. I didn't reach for it right away. I finished rinsing the mug I'd been holding, set it upside down, and dried my hands. There's a difference between snooping and noticing. I wasn't looking for anything. I was responding to something that kept presenting itself. The screen lit up again. Same contact name. Not Vanessa. A woman I'd heard about before. A name that had come up in passing casually like it wasn't worth remembering. It was saved without a last name. I picked up the phone. The message preview was enough to stop me mid-breath. Did she say anything? I unlocked it. No hesitation, no guilt. When your environment starts acting out of pattern, you don't ask permission to investigate. The conversation opened to a stream that didn't belong to a single bad day. It belonged to months, plans, complaints, running commentary. I scrolled slowly, not because I was afraid of what I'd see, but because I needed the full picture before my brain filled in gaps that didn't exist. Mark complained about work, about pressure, about how hard it was to come home to someone who was always tired. He talked about me like I wasn't a person, just a condition, something he managed. Then Vanessa's name appeared. Not once, not twice. Repeated, casual, familiar. She's disciplined, but she's not warm, Mark had typed. Vanessa says I deserve someone more alive. I stared at the words until they stopped rearranging themselves in my head. Alive. As if I was a placeholder, as if being steady meant being absent, as if the parts of me that didn't perform were somehow a deficiency. I kept scrolling. Vanessa wasn't typing. She didn't need to. She existed in the conversation like an authority. Her opinions passed through Mark's fingers without friction. He quoted her the way people quote experts, the way people borrow someone else's certainty when they don't have their own. She doesn't notice things he wrote at one point. She doesn't react. That one almost made me laugh. I scrolled further back, farther than I wanted to. Messages from nights I remembered clearly, evenings I thought were fine, days I'd come home exhausted and still asked how his day went. There were jokes at my expense, not cruel on their own, accumulative, each one shaving something down. She's reliable, he wrote. She'll always be there, reliable, like an appliance. My hands didn't shake. That surprised me. I felt cold but focused, the way I feel before a briefing when the stakes are high and the room is quiet. I took screenshots. Every relevant message, names, dates, times. Not because I planned to confront him right then, but because facts matter. Feelings get dismissed. Screenshots don't. When I was done, I locked the phone and set it back exactly where it had been. Same angle, same spot. I didn't want the night to change yet. I sat at the kitchen table and let the information settle, not emotionally, logistically. This wasn't about hurt. Hurt fades. This was about structure. About realizing I wasn't reacting to one moment at dinner, but to a system that had been running quietly for a long time. Mark came back into the kitchen 10 minutes later, rubbing his eyes. You still up? Yeah, I said. He poured himself a glass of water, drank it too fast. Everything okay? I looked at him. Really looked. He seemed smaller than usual, less certain, not guilty, comfortable. Fine, I said. He nodded and went back to bed. I stayed at the table, phone face down in front of me, and replayed the dinner in my head. Vanessa's timing, her confidence, the way she'd said it like the words already had a place to land. She hadn't been testing a boundary, she'd been reinforcing one. The next morning I woke up early and left before Mark did. Not out of avoidance, out of clarity. At work, I moved through the day the way I always do, efficient, focused, no visible cracks. Inside, something had shifted from confusion to alignment. At lunch, I sat in my car instead of the break room. I opened the screenshots and read them again slower this time. Not to relive them, to understand them. Patterns stood out immediately. Complaints escalated after Vanessa visits, after group dinners, after family gatherings. It wasn't coincidence, it was input. She didn't need access to me. She needed access to him. My phone buzzed. A text from Vanessa. Hope you're okay today. I've been thinking about last night. I didn't reply. That afternoon, Mark texted me too. Can we talk tonight? I replied with a single word. Sure. When I got home, he was already there sitting on the couch, posture stiff, like he'd rehearsed what he wanted to say. He started with an apology that never quite took responsibility. I shouldn't have let her say that, he said. I didn't know how to stop it. You didn't try, I said. He looked uncomfortable. That's not fair. I'm not arguing fairness, I said. I'm stating what happened. He leaned forward. She was joking. I know, I said. You told me. He hesitated. You've been distant. I waited. That one mattered. With everything going on, he continued. Your schedule, your job. Sometimes it feels like there's no room for anything else. Like what? He shrugged. Connection. There it was, the word people use when they want intimacy, without accountability. I didn't bring up the messages. Not yet. I wanted to hear how he framed it without evidence in the room. He talked for a while, circling the same points. How hard it was, how lonely he felt. How Vanessa worried about me, how she'd only ever tried to help. I listened. That part wasn't new. When he finished, he looked at me expectantly like he'd laid out a reasonable case. I need you to understand something, I said. Your feelings don't change facts. What facts? I held his gaze. The ones you're not mentioning. His face shifted, just slightly, a flicker of calculation, not fear, surprise. Are you accusing me of something? He asked. No, I said. I'm noticing things. He didn't like that any more than he had before. That night he slept restlessly. I didn't. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, not replaying conversations but organizing them. Vanessa's words, Mark's silences, the way everyone assumed my quiet meant I didn't see what was happening. By morning, I wasn't asking myself if there was more going on. I was deciding what to do with what I already knew. I closed my laptop, slid it into my bag, and left the house without saying goodbye. The drive to base felt different that morning, not heavier, cleaner. When you stop arguing with reality, things get simpler fast. I parked, checked in, and moved through security on autopilot. Salutes, bad coffee, familiar hallways. This was the environment where emotions don't get votes and clarity is currency. By mid-morning, I'd already decided I wasn't going to confront anyone. Confrontation is for when you want a reaction. I wanted information. I started by doing what I always do when something feels off. I made a list. Not dramatic, not poetic, names, dates, locations, who said what and when. The messages were a backbone, but they weren't the whole body. I needed to understand how the situation was built, not just how it felt. At lunch, I called a legal assistance office on base. I didn't give details. I didn't need to. I asked neutral questions, hypotheticals, the kind people ask when they want to know where the lines are without stepping over them. The answers were straightforward. Assets acquired before marriage matter. Documentation matters. Timing matters. I thanked the attorney and hung up my pen, already moving across the page. That afternoon, Mark texted me twice. Small check-ins. You good running late? I replied with neutral responses. No warmth, no coldness, just enough to keep the pattern stable. Stability buys time. On the way home, I stopped at the bank. Not to do anything dramatic. Just to understand what accounts were, where whose name was on what, and what required 2 signatures instead of 1. The teller smiled too much. I smiled back the appropriate amount. At home, I cooked dinner because that was easier than explaining why I didn't feel like it. Mark ate quickly, distracted, phone face down, but always within reach. I noticed how often he checked it when he thought I wasn't looking. I noticed how quickly he locked it when a notification came in. I didn't mention any of it. After dinner, he sat across from me at the table, fingers laced, like he was bracing for impact. I don't want things to be weird, he said. They're not, I replied. That's not what I mean. I know, I said. You mean quiet. He nodded, relieved to be understood. That night after he fell asleep, I opened my laptop again. I logged into accounts I hadn't checked in months. Retirement, insurance, documents I'd scanned and forgotten about because nothing seemed urgent at the time. Everything was where it should be. Everything told the same story. I made copies. Not because I planned to use them, but because planning assumes you'll need options. The next day, Vanessa called me mid-morning. I let it ring. She left a voicemail, cheerful, concerned, just wanted to make sure you're okay. I deleted it without responding. Later, she texted Mark. I saw it when his phone lit up on the counter. How is she? No greeting, no pretense. That phrasing mattered. Over the next few days, I paid attention to the rhythm of things. When Vanessa reached out, when Mark seemed distracted, when conversations looped back to the same points. It became obvious that this wasn't new. It was just visible now. Mark started asking questions that didn't match concern. About my schedule, about a potential reassignment I'd mentioned months ago and never followed up on, about benefits, about how long certain postings usually last. Just curious, he said. I nodded. Makes sense. Vanessa escalated too. She sent articles about work-life balance, shared posts about emotional availability, dropped comments about how hard it must be to be married to someone who's always somewhere else. I didn't argue with her. I didn't defend myself. Defense invites debate. I wasn't interested in debate. At work, I requested a meeting with my supervisor, not to complain, to ask about timelines, options, what flexibility looked like in practice, not theory. We talked in general terms. I listened more than I spoke. By the end of the conversation, I had what I needed. That evening, Mark mentioned money, casually, like it had just occurred to him. If you get that next assignment, does it change anything for us? Define change, I said. He smiled like he'd asked a normal question. You know, long-term stuff. I looked at him. We'll be fine. He seemed satisfied with that. I wasn't. That night I lay awake again, but not because my mind was racing. It was working. I thought about how easily people confuse access with entitlement, how Vanessa spoke like she had a stake in my marriage, how Mark listened like she did. This wasn't about jealousy. It wasn't even about infidelity yet. It was about alignment, about who was in the room when decisions were being shaped. The next morning I changed my passwords, not dramatically, just methodically. Email, banking, cloud storage, anywhere information lived. I updated recovery options. I checked login histories. Nothing alarming, nothing unexpected. Control isn't about paranoia, it's about reducing variables. Mark noticed something was different. Not the changes themselves, but the absence of reassurance. I wasn't checking in, I wasn't explaining my tone. I wasn't trying to smooth anything over. You've been distant, he said again a few nights later. I've been focused, I replied. On what? On my life, I said. He laughed like it was a joke. I'm part of that. Are you? I asked. He stopped laughing. Vanessa invited us to another family dinner, bigger this time, more people. We should all spend more time together, she wrote. After everything. I read the message twice and set the phone down. Mark watched my face. Do you want to go? Yes, I said. He looked surprised. Really, yes. Because by then I wasn't deciding whether to protect myself. That part was done. I was deciding how much space I was going to give them to keep underestimating me. I answered Vanessa's invitation with a thumbs up and nothing else, then set the phone down where Mark could see it. He watched me like he was trying to read the temperature of the room without a thermometer. You sure? He asked. Yes, I said, already pulling my jacket from the chair. On the drive, he talked more than usual. About traffic, about work, about how his department might restructure soon. He mentioned money twice without realizing he'd done it. Not numbers, outcomes, stability, what made sense for us. I listened. At Vanessa's place, the house was louder than last time. More people, more movement. She'd planned it that way. Big gatherings dilute accountability. Someone is always laughing. Someone is always pouring a drink. You can say almost anything and call it atmosphere. She greeted Mark first, then me a beat later like it hadn't been intentional. So glad you both came, she said. I was worried you'd be busy. I wasn't. Dinner moved fast. Plates passed. Glasses refilled. Conversations overlapped. Vanessa floated, checking reactions, adjusting angles. She told a story about a couple she knew who almost broke up because one of them worked too much. Everyone laughed. She glanced at me when she said too much. I smiled. Not warm, not cold, neutral. Mark leaned toward me. She's trying, he whispered. She's calibrating, I said. He didn't know what to do with that. After dessert, Vanessa steered the conversation where she wanted it. Careers, sacrifice, the cost of ambition. She framed it as admiration. That's her favorite rapper. I don't know how you do it, she said, addressing me directly now. All that structure, all that discipline. I'd lose my mind. I like knowing where I stand, I said. She nodded. Must be nice. Then to Mark. It's hard, though, being married to someone who's always thinking 10 steps ahead. He laughed. A short one. Reflexive. I mean, she continued, it takes a special kind of patience. There it was again, not criticism, positioning. I excused myself to get water and let them keep talking. From the kitchen, I could hear pieces of it. Vanessa asking questions she already knew the answers to. Mark responding like he was being interviewed for a role he wanted. The words benefits and timelines floated through the doorway, casual enough to be overlooked. When I came back, Vanessa was holding court, explaining how relationships work best when everyone is on the same page. Otherwise, she said, someone ends up carrying more weight than the other. She looked at me like it was a joke. I nodded like it was a fact. On the drive home, Mark was quiet. That never lasts. I think she worries about us, he said finally. I think she worries about herself, I replied. He frowned. That's not fair. I didn't say it was, I said. He sighed. You're reading too much into this. I'm reading exactly what's there, I said. Over the next week, the questions intensified. Not accusatory, curious. Mark wanted to know when I'd hear back about the potential reassignment. Whether it would mean a pay change, how long those postings usually last, whether benefits adjusted automatically or took time. Vanessa texted articles about couples navigating distance. She sent links to podcasts about communication. She framed everything as support. Support is easier to accept than scrutiny. I didn't shut it down. I let it breathe. At work, I requested a follow-up meeting. This time, I asked specifics, not hypotheticals, timelines, options, what paperwork actually triggered changes, what could be requested quietly and what couldn't. The answers were clear. So were the implications. That evening, Mark cooked again. He'd been doing that more lately, overcorrecting. He poured wine for himself, soda for me. So he said, leaning against the counter, if this thing comes through, do we need to make any big decisions? We'll see, I said. He smiled like that meant progress. I just want to be prepared. For what? For changes. I set my glass down. Change isn't always optional. He laughed uneasy. You know what I mean. I did. He meant money, he meant leverage. He meant outcomes he hadn't earned but expected to share. Later that night, Vanessa called him while he was in the shower. I heard the phone buzz from the bedroom. I didn't answer it. I didn't need to. The voicemail notification popped up a minute later. I didn't listen to it either. The next day, she texted me directly. He seemed stressed, just checking in. I replied, we're fine. It was the same word I'd used before. It worked just as well. Patterns became obvious once I stopped participating in the emotional exchange. Vanessa escalated when she sensed uncertainty. Mark mirrored her concern, like it gave him cover to ask for things he wouldn't otherwise. They thought they were waiting for me to decide, for me to move, for me to make something official so they could step into the space they'd been measuring. I let them think that. At lunch one day, a coworker asked if I was excited about the possible reassignment. I shrugged. It's one option. That evening, Mark mentioned it again. People at your job seem confident. People say things I said. He watched me closely. You don't sound excited. I don't broadcast decisions, I replied. Vanessa hosted another small gathering. I declined this time, not abruptly, just calmly. Can't make it, she responded with concern. Then disappointment, then reassurance. 3 texts in 10 minutes, I didn't reply. Mark noticed. She's worried you're pulling away. I am, I said. From assumptions, I said. He didn't push. That told me more than an argument would have. By the end of the week, I had everything I needed. Information, timing, a clear picture of how they saw me and where they thought the leverage lived. They weren't wrong about one thing. I was thinking 10 steps ahead. They just never considered that I might already be on a different board. I filled out the paperwork in my office with the door closed and the blinds half drawn. The way you do when the decision isn't emotional anymore. Just final. No dramatic pauses, no second guessing. The form asked for preferences, not explanations. I selected the option that changed everything quietly, the one that didn't require an announcement, the one that didn't invite opinions. When I hit submit, nothing happened. No alert, no fanfare, just a confirmation number and a timestamp. That was it. At lunch, I ate at my desk and answered emails like any other day. A coworker stopped by to complain about a scheduling issue. I helped her fix it. We joked about coffee being a food group. From the outside, I was exactly where everyone expected me to be. On the inside, the timeline had shifted. That evening, Mark came home in a good mood. Too good. He set his bag down and kissed my cheek longer than usual. I've been thinking, he said. We should plan something. A trip. Just us. I nodded. Maybe. He grinned like that meant yes. Once things settle, things are always settling, I said. He laughed. You know what I mean, I did. He meant once the uncertainty resolved in a way he could use. Vanessa texted while we were eating. A group message. Family dinner next week. Everyone's coming. No excuses. A smiley face followed unnecessary and strategic. Mark looked at me. That could be good. For who, I asked. For us, he said quickly. I finished chewing before answering. We'll see. That answer didn't land the way it used to. He frowned. You've been saying that a lot. It's accurate, I said. Over the next few days, I moved quietly. I didn't pack boxes. I didn't make lists on the fridge. I transferred documents to a secure folder Mark didn't know existed. I scheduled appointments under neutral names. I adjusted automatic payments so nothing would flag immediately. At work, I met with the same supervisor again. This time we talked logistics, start dates, housing options, what overlap looked like. He raised an eyebrow when I chose the earliest window. You're sure, he asked? Yes, I said. He nodded. All right. At home, Mark noticed I was calmer. People mistake calm for comfort. He leaned into it. He started talking about the future like it was already mapped. When you're settled, he said. Once this phase passes. He said we a lot. I didn't correct him. Vanessa called me on a Tuesday afternoon. I answered because I wanted to hear her voice, not her words. You've been distant, she said without preamble. I've been busy, I replied. With what life, I said. She laughed sharp. You don't have to shut me out. I'm not, I said. I'm just not available. That threw her. Availability is her currency. I worry about you, she said. You don't let anyone in. I let the right people in, I replied. There was a pause. I don't want you making decisions alone. I smiled. She couldn't see it. I've always made decisions alone. She changed tactics. Mark's been stressed. I know, I said. He needs reassurance. So do I said. Another pause. This isn't like you. It is, I replied. You just didn't notice before. She hung up shortly after that, claiming another call. I set the phone down and didn't feel the urge to check it again. The family dinner loomed. Vanessa sent reminders. Mark mentioned it every other day like repetition would turn it into something inevitable. I didn't decline. I didn't confirm. I let the ambiguity do the work. 2 days before it, Mark asked directly, Are we going? Yes, I said. He relaxed instantly. Good, not the way you think, I added. He frowned. What does that mean? It means I'll be there, I said. That's all. The night before, I packed a small bag and put it in the trunk of my car before Mark got home. Nothing obvious, no suitcases, just essentials, clothes, documents, things you don't want to replace. He didn't notice. At dinner, Vanessa was in her element. The table was full, family, friends, familiar faces. She took the seat at the head without asking. Mark sat beside her. I took the chair across from them. She launched into stories right away, loud, animated, inclusive, the way she always does when she wants control without appearing to take it. She made jokes about schedules, about seriousness, about how hard it must be to live with someone who plans everything. People laughed, not because it was funny, because it was easy. I ate slowly, listened, let her talk. Mark reached for my hand once. I didn't pull away. I didn't squeeze back either. Vanessa eventually turned the conversation toward balance. How important it is, how marriages fail without it. She said my name like a cautionary example, not a target. Some people don't realize when they're pushing others away, she said, smiling at me. They think discipline is the same as connection. I looked at her, really looked. She was confident, comfortable, certain of her footing. I set my fork down. I don't confuse discipline with control, I said. I use it to make choices without noise. The table went quiet for a beat. Vanessa laughed it off. See that tone, always so serious. Mark shifted in his seat. She didn't mean I know what she means, I said calmly. Vanessa's smile tightened. I'm just saying people notice things. So do I, replied. That was the moment. Not the confrontation, not the exposure, just a small adjustment in posture, a recalibration of who was watching whom. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse anyone of anything. I stayed seated steady and let the room feel the difference. Vanessa tried to steer the conversation back. Jokes, wine, movement, but the balance had shifted, subtly, permanently. Mark leaned toward me, whispering, What are you doing? Exactly what I said. I replied, Being here. And as the night continued with plates passed and laughter returning in uneven bursts, I stayed where I was already operating on a timeline that no one else at the table could see. I didn't stand up. I didn't clear my throat. I didn't do anything that would signal a performance. I stayed seated, elbows resting lightly on the table, and waited for the noise to die down on its own. Vanessa was mid-story, waving her glass, laughing at something that hadn't landed quite right. When she noticed no one was laughing with her anymore, she slowed, eyes moving around the table. "What?" she asked, smiling. "Did I miss something?" I met her gaze. "You didn't miss it," I said. "You created it." The room stiffened, not silence yet. More like everyone suddenly remembered they were in someone else's house. Vanessa laughed softly. "Okay," she said. "I don't know what that's supposed to mean, but if I said something, you did," I said. "More than once." Mark shifted beside her. "Brooke, this isn't—" I held up a hand. Not sharp, not aggressive, just enough to pause him. "I'm not interrupting you," I said. "I'm responding." That distinction mattered. I looked around the table, not for allies but for witnesses. "I don't usually explain myself in group settings," I said. "But since my marriage and my character have been discussed publicly, I'm going to be clear." Vanessa set her glass down slowly. "No one's attacking you. You joked about my sex life," I said evenly. "At my anniversary dinner, in front of my husband. That's not a misunderstanding." A few people shifted in their seats. Someone stared at their plate. Someone else looked directly at Vanessa, curious now. She smiled, brittle. "I was teasing. You know how families are." "I do," I said. "That's why this matters." Mark leaned forward. "We talked about this already." "Yes," I said. "You explained why it was acceptable." That landed harder than I expected. His mouth opened, then closed. Vanessa jumped in before he could recover. "You're being dramatic," she said. "You've always been sensitive about how people see you." I nodded. "I am careful about how I'm treated," she scoffed. "This is exactly what I mean. Everything has to be so controlled." I smiled, just slightly. Control is pretending something didn't happen so everyone stays comfortable. I'm not doing that. The table went quiet then, real quiet. The kind that presses against your ears. "I'm not angry," I continued. "I'm not embarrassed. I'm just done being talked about like I'm not here." Vanessa crossed her arms. "So what now? You're accusing me of something I'm not accusing you," I said. "I'm describing behavior." Mark tried again. "This doesn't need to happen like this." "It already did," I replied. "Just not on my terms." I turned back to Vanessa. "You've had a lot to say about my marriage, about my priorities, about what I supposedly lack. What I'm curious about is why you felt so comfortable saying it." She laughed too loud. "Because I'm your sister." "That's not an answer," I said. She looked at Mark, expecting backup. He didn't meet her eyes. "Say it," I said, still calm. "Why did you think that was your place?" Her smile faltered. "Just a crack. I was trying to help." "By humiliating me?" I asked. She shook her head. "You don't see how hard this is for him." There it was, the pronoun shift. I looked at Mark. "Is that how you see it?" He swallowed. "She's just worried about us." "I didn't ask about her," I said. "I asked about you." The room held its breath. "I never asked her to say anything," he said finally. "That's not what I asked," I replied. Vanessa stood up abruptly. "This is ridiculous. You're turning a family dinner into a trial." I stayed seated. "No," I said. "I'm correcting the record." She pointed at me. "You've always thought you were better than us." I nodded again. "I've never thought about that at all." That threw her. Insults only work if they hit something real. "I don't think I'm better," I continued. "I think I'm allowed to exist without commentary." One of our relatives cleared their throat. "Maybe we should change the subject." "No," I said gently. "We shouldn't." Vanessa laughed high and sharp. "Wow. So now you're policing conversation. I'm setting boundaries," I said. Out loud, since subtlety didn't work. Mark rubbed his temples. "This is getting out of hand." "It already was," I replied. "I just stopped pretending it wasn't." Vanessa leaned forward. "You know what your problem is? You don't let people in. You push everyone away and then act surprised when things fall apart." I met her gaze. "You confuse access with entitlement." The words landed heavy. She opened her mouth, then stopped. The room shifted again. People were no longer uncomfortable. They were attentive. "I don't owe anyone intimacy as proof of value," I continued. "And I don't owe you silence to protect your image." Mark finally spoke, voice low. "This isn't fair." I turned to him. Neither was staying quiet. Vanessa grabbed her glass, drained it, and set it down hard. "You're doing this on purpose." "Yes," I said. "I am." The admission surprised even me with how easy it felt. She stared at me, trying to decide which angle to attack from next. None presented themselves. I wasn't emotional, I wasn't defensive, I wasn't asking for approval. "I think you're projecting," she said weakly. "I think you're uncomfortable," I replied. "That's different." Someone laughed nervously. Someone else shifted closer to their partner. The room had fully turned now. Not against her, toward the truth. "I'm not asking anyone to take sides," I said, addressing the table. "I'm just making it clear that jokes at my expense are not welcome, from anyone, especially family." Vanessa shook her head. "Unbelievable." Mark looked at her, then at me. "Can we talk about this later? We've talked enough," I said. He frowned. "That's it. That's all there needs to be," I replied. I reached for my glass, took a sip, and set it down. My hands were steady. My voice hadn't raised once. Vanessa sat back down slowly, eyes fixed on the table. The conversation resumed around us in awkward fragments. Weather, work, anything but what had just happened. I stayed exactly where I was, listening, letting the room absorb the recalibration. Nothing had exploded. No one had stormed out. No accusations had been hurled back and forth. But the truth had been spoken plainly without theatrics, and everyone in that room knew something fundamental had changed. And I was perfectly comfortable letting them sit with it. No one stood up. No one clapped. No one rushed in to fix it. The conversation came back in pieces like a radio signal, struggling through interference. Someone commented on the food. Someone else asked about work. The tone was polite, but the rhythm was gone. People were choosing words carefully now, measuring reactions before committing to them. Vanessa didn't say much after that. She sat back in her chair, arms folded, eyes fixed somewhere between her plate and the middle distance. When she did speak, it was short, neutral, stripped of the confidence she'd carried all night. The room had stopped orbiting her. Mark was quieter too. He leaned back, jaw tight, staring at nothing. Every now and then he glanced at me like he was trying to figure out whether this was still happening or if he could pretend it hadn't. I finished my meal and set my fork down. My appetite hadn't disappeared. That surprised me. I wasn't riding adrenaline. I wasn't shaking. I felt steady, like I'd finally stopped compensating for everyone else's comfort. Someone asked if I wanted dessert. I shook my head. "I'm good." Vanessa laughed once reflexively, then caught herself. "Of course you are," she said, then went quiet again. The evening wound down without ceremony. People made excuses to leave earlier than planned. Hugs were shorter. Eye contact lingered longer than usual. I caught fragments of whispered conversations near the doorway, nothing accusatory, just processing. One of our relatives squeezed my shoulder as she passed. "I didn't know," she said softly. "I didn't either," I replied. Mark walked people out, thanking them, apologizing in the vague way people do when they don't know who they're apologizing for. Vanessa stayed seated, scrolling on her phone, face carefully blank. When the door finally closed and the house emptied out, the silence felt different than it had before. It wasn't tense. It was settled. Vanessa stood up abruptly. "Well," she said, forcing a smile. "That was something." "Yes," I said. She scoffed. "You didn't have to do that." "I did," I replied. She shook her head. "You embarrassed me." I met her gaze. "You embarrassed yourself." Mark stepped between us instinctively. "Can we not do this right now?" Vanessa rounded on him. "You didn't say anything." He rubbed the back of his neck. "I didn't think it would blow up like that." She laughed sharp. "It didn't blow up. She planned it. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Planning implies manipulation. This had been correction." Vanessa grabbed her coat and bag. "I'm not staying for this," she said, heading for the door. Mark followed her halfway. "Vanessa, wait." She turned back once. "You're really going to let her talk to me like that?" He hesitated. That was all it took. She laughed again, this time bitter. "Wow. Okay." The door slammed harder than necessary. Mark stood there for a moment, hands still on the doorknob, like he was deciding which side of the threshold he belonged on. Then he turned to me. "You didn't have to make it public," he said. "I didn't make it public," I replied. "It already was," he sighed. "You knew this would cause problems." "Yes," I said. "So why do it?" "Because not doing it was causing different ones," I said. He sat down heavily at the table, staring at the empty plates. "You could have talked to me." "I tried," I said. "You explained it away." He looked up. "You blindsided her." She blindsided me first, I replied. I just stopped absorbing it quietly. He shook his head. This isn't how families handle things. I pulled my chair back and stood. This is how boundaries work when they've been ignored. I started clearing the table, not out of habit, out of practicality. The night was still moving forward. Mark watched me for a moment, then stood and helped. We worked in silence, stacking plates, wiping surfaces, moving around each other like strangers who knew each other's routines. When the kitchen was clean, he leaned against the counter. She's not going to let this go. I'm not asking her to, I said. He frowned. What does that mean? It means I'm not managing her reaction anymore, I replied. He studied me. You've changed. I've stopped explaining, I said. He didn't argue. That told me everything. Later in bed, he lay on his back staring at the ceiling. I don't know where this leaves us. I turned off the light. I know exactly where it leaves me. He didn't respond. The next few days were quiet in a way that felt earned. Vanessa didn't call, didn't text. Family group chats went silent. No one wanted to be the first to step into whatever this was now. At work, nothing changed. Meetings, deadlines, the usual. I moved through it with the same focus I always had, but without the mental static that had been draining me for months. When I got home, Mark was already there scrolling on his phone tense. She's telling people you overreacted, he said without looking up. I expected that, I replied. She says you're shutting her out. I am, I said. He looked at me. So that's it? For now, I replied. He exhaled. I don't like being in the middle. You put yourself there, I said. That night he slept on the couch. Not because we argued, because neither of us suggested otherwise. The following weekend, I packed a small box with personal items and put it in my car. Nothing dramatic, just things I didn't want to leave behind if I needed space. Mark noticed. What's that, mine? I said. He nodded slowly. Are you leaving? I'm adjusting, I replied. Vanessa finally reached out 3 days later. A long message, defensive, emotional, framed as concern. Accusations wrapped in vulnerability. I read it once and didn't respond. I wasn't angry. I wasn't waiting for an apology. I wasn't even disappointed. I was watching how people behave when they realize the dynamic has changed and they no longer control the narrative. And in that quiet aftermath, with no speeches and no reconciliations, it became clear who was willing to sit with the truth and who needed noise to survive it. I didn't announce anything. I didn't explain my plans. I just started moving my life in a way that didn't include checking in with Mark or anticipating Vanessa's reactions. The first thing I changed was my schedule. I stopped rearranging it to be home at a certain hour. If I stayed late at work, I stayed late. If I went to the gym, after I went. Mark noticed, but he didn't comment right away. People sense when questions won't be answered. At work, my reassignment paperwork cleared faster than expected. No one made a big deal out of it. My supervisor simply told me when to expect the official notice and what needed to be done before the transition. I nodded, took notes, and thanked him. Clean, professional, exactly how I wanted it. At home, the atmosphere shifted into something neutral but fragile. Mark tried small gestures, coffee in the morning, asking if I needed anything from the store. He hovered like someone hoping familiarity would rewind time. Vanessa, on the other hand, escalated. She started with indirect posts, quotes about forgiveness, about family sticking together, about how silence can be cruel. People reacted to them, liked them, commented with vague encouragement. She never named me, but she didn't have to. Mark showed me one of the posts like it was evidence. She's hurting, he said. So am I, replied. That's different, he said. Then stopped himself. Yes, I said. It is. A week later, she called my mother. I found out because my mother called me voice careful. Your sister's been crying, she said. I know, I replied. She says you've shut her out. I've set limits, I said. There was a pause. I just don't want this to tear the family apart. It won't, I said. Pretending nothing happened would. My mother sighed. You've always been so strong. I almost corrected her. Almost told her strength wasn't the point, but I didn't. Some realizations need time. Mark grew restless as Vanessa grew louder. He started pacing when he talked on the phone. He spent more time out, less time explaining where he'd been. He framed it as giving me space, but it felt more like avoidance. One night he came home late and didn't bother hiding it. She thinks you're trying to punish her, he said. dropping his keys on the counter. I'm not thinking about her at all, I replied. He stared at me. That's worse, for who I asked. He didn't answer. The legal assistant's office followed up with me about the reassignment. In the same conversation, I asked another hypothetical question. About separation. About how assets are handled when things don't resolve quietly. The attorney didn't ask why. He just explained the process. I listened, took notes, asked for clarification where needed. That night, I organized my documents into 2 folders. One stayed in the house, one went into my bag. Nothing dramatic, just redundancy. Vanessa tried a different approach. She showed up unannounced one afternoon while Mark was still at work. I opened the door and didn't step aside. I just want to talk, she said, eyes already scanning past me. I'm not available, I replied. She laughed, incredulous. You can't be serious. I am, I said. She leaned closer. You don't get to do this. I met her gaze. I do. Her face hardened. You think you're better than me? No, I said. I think I'm done explaining myself to you. She scoffed. You're overreacting. Then it shouldn't bother you, I replied. That stopped her. For a second she looked unsure. Then she straightened. You're making a mistake, I nodded. We'll see. She left without another word. When Mark got home, he knew immediately. She stopped by, he said. Yes, I replied. He rubbed his face. This is spiraling. It's clarifying, I said. He shook his head. You're tearing everything apart. I'm letting it show how it was built, I replied. That night he slept in the bedroom. I slept on the couch. No argument, no discussion, just distance. The next morning I packed more things. Clothes I wore often, documents I didn't want misplaced. Mark watched me from the doorway. You're really doing this, he said. I already did, I replied. He laughed without humor. You didn't even try to fix it. I tried for years, I said. You just didn't notice. At work, the official reassignment notice came through. I signed it digitally and forwarded it where needed. The date was close enough to matter. Vanessa sent one last long message. Apologies mixed with accusations. Love wrapped around control. I read it once, archived it, and turned my phone off for the night. Mark sat at the kitchen table staring at nothing. I don't know how we got here, he said. I do, I replied. We just didn't talk about it. He looked at me like he wanted to argue, then deflated. What happens now? I finished packing the bag I was working on and zipped it closed. Things keep moving, I said. Outside, the evening was quiet. Neighbors went about their routines. Cars passed. Life didn't pause for family drama. And that was the part that made everything unmistakably real. Consequences didn't arrive with speeches or fireworks. They showed up in routines that no longer fit indoors, that didn't open the same way, and in the growing realization that some choices can't be undone just because the fallout is uncomfortable. I locked the door behind me and stood there for a second, hand still on the knob, listening to the apartment settle into its own quiet. It wasn't dramatic, no echo, no sense of loss rushing in, just a different kind of stillness, the kind that doesn't ask anything of you. The place was small and temporary, exactly what I needed. A couch, a table, a bed by the window. I set my bag down, kicked off my shoes, and opened the blinds just enough to let in the streetlight. Cars passed. Someone laughed outside. Life kept moving without checking in first. That felt right. The first morning there, I woke up before my alarm out of habit. I made coffee, stood by the window, and drank it black. No one asked where I was going. No one commented on my schedule. My phone stayed quiet longer than it had in weeks. At work, the transition picked up speed. Briefings, handoffs, final signatures. People congratulated me in the low-key way they do when something is earned, not flashy. I returned keys, cleared out my desk, and turned in paperwork without ceremony. Mark texted once. Just a question mark. I didn't answer. Vanessa didn't text at all. That told me more than any apology would have. Silence from her wasn't reflection. It was recalibration. She was deciding which version of the story she could live with now that I wasn't participating. A week later, the divorce paperwork arrived in my email, clean and procedural. I reviewed it carefully, flagged what needed clarification, and sent it back with comments. No anger, no urgency, just precision. Mark called that night. I let it ring until it stopped. He tried again 10 minutes later. I declined the call and sent a short message instead. I'm not available to talk. Please keep communication to email. He replied almost immediately. Are you serious? Yes. That was the last exchange we had that wasn't logistical. Vanessa showed up once more, not at my door, but in my mother's voice on the phone. She's really struggling, my mother said. She doesn't understand how things got this bad. I do, I replied. She misses you. I miss who I thought she was, I said. That's different, my mother sighed. You've always been so composed. I've always been careful, I corrected. I'm just not absorbing things anymore. There was a pause. I hope one day you can forgive her. I'm not holding a grudge, I said. I'm holding a boundary. That seemed to land. The family adjusted in small ways. Invitations stopped including my name automatically. Group chats grew quieter. Someone else filled the space Vanessa used to dominate. The dynamic shifted without me needing to manage it. At the apartment, I unpacked slowly, not because I was overwhelmed, but because I didn't need everything at once. I liked choosing what earned a place. A framed photo from a deployment, a notebook, a lamp that gave off just enough light. Mark emailed once more, longer this time. Apologies mixed with regret, explanations that came too late to matter. He asked if there was any chance we could reset. I read it once, saved it to the folder, and replied with 2 sentences. I wish you well. Please direct further communication through our attorneys. It felt clean, not cold, final without being cruel. Vanessa sent a message a few days later, short, defensive. I never meant to hurt you. You took things too far. I stared at it, then archived it without replying. There was nothing left to clarify. The reassignment date arrived quietly. I loaded my car, drove out of the city, and didn't look back. The base was different. New routines, new faces, same standards. I fit immediately. In the evenings I walked. Sometimes I cooked. Sometimes I ate takeout standing at the counter. I didn't fill the silence. I let it exist. People noticed the change in me, not in the way they comment on weight loss or new haircuts. In the way they stop interrupting. In the way conversations ended sooner, cleaner. Respect has a sound when it clicks into place. One afternoon, I got a message from a relative I hadn't heard from in a while. I wanted you to know, she wrote, I see what happened now. I'm sorry I laughed that night, I replied. Thank you, that was enough. Months passed. The divorce finalized without surprises. Assets divided as expected. No last-minute drama. Mark didn't fight what he couldn't justify. Vanessa didn't show up anywhere she wasn't invited. On a quiet Sunday, I sat on my balcony, boots kicked off, feet on the rail, watching the sun drop behind the buildings. My phone buzzed. A notification from social media. Vanessa had posted something vague again. Quotes about healing, about being misunderstood. I scrolled past it without stopping. The victory wasn't that she stopped talking. It was that I stopped listening. That night I cooked dinner for myself. Nothing fancy, just enough. I ate slowly, cleaned up, and sat down with a book I'd been meaning to finish. No TV noise, no background commentary, just space. I thought about the dinner that started everything, the laughter, the silence, the moment I noticed the look that didn't belong. I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt clarity, the kind that sticks. Some people think revenge has to be loud to count. It doesn't. Sometimes it's just removing yourself from a dynamic that depended on you being smaller. I didn't take anything from Vanessa. I didn't punish Mark. I didn't win an argument or deliver a final speech. I kept my dignity. I kept my trajectory. I kept my peace. And in the end, that was the only outcome that mattered. 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 Outcome that mattered.